Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Jennifer Coulter. I'm the Director of Education and Public Programs here at the Morgan, and I'm so excited to welcome you all tonight, both in person and via live stream, as we continue our series of conversations with Maria Popova in celebration of the Morgan Centennial. I'm curious, just by a show of hands, who has been to any of the other conversations with Maria in this series? Okay, a few of you. And who has been to the Morgan before as a visitor? Excellent. And is anyone here for the very first time? Fantastic. Well, welcome to all of you, both new and returning visitors. So the Morgan is a place where art and music and history and literature come together. And really, we have a collection that tells the history of human creativity from antiquity to today. It's a collection that represents an incredible range of time periods, cultures, and ideas. And we have many examples of beloved children's literature in this collection. So tonight, we're thrilled to welcome Maria Popova and Sophie Blackall for a conversation about art and life and creative practice, and a few highlights from the Morgan's collection of children's literature, including The Little Prince and letters written by Beatrix Potter and Lewis Carroll, will serve as springboards for the conversation tonight. So Maria Popova thinks and writes about our search for meaning, sometimes through science and philosophy, sometimes through poetry and children's books, always through the lens of wonder. She's the creator of the Marginalian, born in 2006 under the name Brain Pickings, which is included in the Library of Congress Permanent Digital Archive of Culturally Valuable Materials. She's the author of Figuring and maker of the live show The Universe in Verse, a charitable celebration of the wonder of reality through stories of science winged with poetry, which is also now a beautiful book and is available this evening. So I encourage you to check it out if you have not done so already. Sophie Blackall is an award-winning illustrator of over 50 books for children, including the New York Times bestselling Ivy and Bean series, the 2016 Caldecott Medal winner Finding Winnie, and the 2019 Caldecott Medal winner Hello Lighthouse, which she also wrote. She's the 5-time recipient of the New York Times Best Illustrated Picture Book Award and has worked with UNICEF and Save the Children UK on global health and literacy initiatives. Originally from Australia, she now splits her time between Brooklyn, New York and the Catskill Mountains, where she and her husband run a retreat for the children's book community called Milkwood Farm. And in addition to her children's books, she also has a book for grown-ups, which we have available here this evening as well, and I can't recommend it highly enough. It's called Things to Look Forward to, 52 Large and Small Joys for Today and Every Day. And the description reads in part, everyone needs things to look forward to, big things and small things, on good days and on bad days, things that will buoy our spirits and make us laugh and help us feel alive. So please join me in welcoming Maria Popova and Sophie Blackall. Good evening.
Can you hear me? Yes. Good evening. So the funny thing is, the seed for this series was planted quite a while ago, so I chose the items for each conversation quite a while ago, but this past week, I had a whole other feeling about what we're talking about tonight. So I had chosen for my conversation with Sophie the original watercolors for The Little Prince, the diary entry in which Lewis Carroll came up with Wonderland, and we're adding some Beatrix Potter letters. Now, I grew up on the pages of The Little Prince and Alice in Wonderland. I was born in Bulgaria, which was a dictatorship when I was born, and I loved those fantastical worlds, both of them kind of playing with this question, what is real, what is to be believed, and both of them painting worlds of wonder and kindness. And when I came to America at 19 alone, I thought I was coming to such a world. Now, the morning of the 2016 election, I woke up And I reached out to my wisest friend to ask what the hell to do. She was 100 at the time. Her name is Helen. She was a Holocaust survivor. And her answer really surprised me because she said the Holocaust began with a democratic election. So politics is really not how things are governed in the world, because good people opted into something not great. And she said, this is a symptom. Politics is a symptom of society, and the solution is not on the level of symptoms, but on the level of cause, which means it must begin with the moral education of the young, with raising such children that they cannot want or imagine a world that is not kind, that unkindness is unconscionable to them. And now, I don't believe in moralizing children, but I do believe that morality is a branch of the imagination, just like creativity and curiosity. And if the imagination is rooted in kindness, then morality stands a pretty good chance. So with this light, it's very interesting for me to think about Alice and the Little Prince. As you know, The Little Prince was written in the middle of the World War, and Alice was written while America was ruptured in a civil war. And I want to start with the dedication of The Little Prince, because Antoine de Saint Exupéry dedicated it to his childhood best friend, who was living in Nazi-occupied Paris at the time. And this is what it says. Oh, this, by the way, is my original 1943 edition of The Little Prince, which is my favorite thing in my house. It is part of my insurance, actually. I insured the book. Okay, this is what it says. It's my favorite dedication in all of literature. To Leon Worth, I ask the indulgence of the children who may read this book. For dedicating it to a grown-up, I have a serious reason. He is the best friend I have in the world. I have another reason. This grown-up understands everything, even books about children. I have a third reason. He lives in France where he is hungry and cold. He needs cheering up. If all these reasons are not enough, I will dedicate the book to the child from whom this grown-up grew. All grown-ups were once children, although few of them remember it. And so I correct my dedication to Leon Worth when he was a little boy. Now, I know, Sophie, you are ambivalent about The Little Prince.
I was really careful not to say anything about that until Maria had actually asked me here. I said yes, and Morgan had signed off, and then I said, I'm not sure I really like The Little Prince. Yeah, ooh, yeah, it's going to be ugly.
Well, let me just point to one thing. Now, I personally read The Little Prince once a year, every year, and each of the planets in it, which depict a different human vice, every year tells me something about my life that I need to examine or the world that I'm living through, and every year it's different. This year, this is from The Little Prince. This guy is in there in the book. And he's like this mean businessman who governs a planet like a business. And anyway, over to you.
I mean, and this is, we have so many things to talk about. So many things. I even have a list. I have a list of things to talk about. And
which is listed like an index. We both love indices, so you can see it's ear, comma, excited.
Ear excited, ear, Carroll. I'm hoping we get to those. If if we haven't, Q&A time, please. We don't need to, that was loud, sorry, talk too much about how we differ about The Little Prince, but I will say the one thing, there are two things that bothered me about it. And I would love you to tell me I'm wrong, okay, or to state your cause. One is I don't think The Little Prince is a child. I have never met a child as wise or sweet or calm or thoughtful or focused on his single questioning. Most children I meet, like, I have a question, I have a question, I have a question, and then when you finally ask them, it's like, oh, I forgot. Or they have so many questions that are changing, and the Little Prince is so singularly focused, which I think is a kind of grown-up thing. But also, that there are no women or female characters in the book who are not vain and fragile and manipulative. And I think even as a kid, that bothered me a little bit.
Well, do you think the fox and the sheep have a gender? I don't remember them having.
Oh, see, that's why she is so smart. But maybe it's his relationship with the rose that is.
I mean, the lovely thing about books,
Yes.
Children's books, to me, the ones that endure, can be read both when you're a child and when you're a grown-up.
Yes.
And as a reader of any book, you bring so much of yourself to it. Now, to me, The Little Prince and the Rose was very much about a mother-child relationship, an inattentive, non-present mother, not to bring too much of myself into it. But, and that single focus is something that young children have. They're always searching for the mother's gaze, the mother's presence. So to me, that was very much about this child trying to essentially parent himself and figure life out for himself when his single focus object is so just self-involved.
Yeah.
But he loves her the way a child loves the mother, however imperfect she may be.
That's really interesting, because I always thought of it as a romantic love. And I guess I'd read it somewhere that it was, based on his relationship with his wife, which was tempestuous. And but I will, and I didn't mean to say that there aren't things that I don't fully appreciate about the book, because there are. And one of those is the idea about drawing at the beginning is fantastic. The way that he draws the elephant consuming the boa constrictor, and the grown-ups don't see it, but do we have that picture? Or it's everybody knows that it's the first.
I don't know who can see up here, but this hat-looking thing is actually the boa swallowing an elephant, and he teases himself about what a bad drawer, artist he is.
And the thing that's so interesting, it's the insurance squeak. I'm the one who drops things. You don't drop things.
It has landed. To earth.
Yeah. Is the sort of very real and true and heartbreaking thing that he is discouraged from drawing because the grown-ups say, lay down your pencils. You are not...
You're no Sophie Blackall.
Oh, we'll get to that. He is not a draftsperson, but he can see this, and that is, any child who shows you their drawing, and if you know enough to say, tell me about your drawing, and what may look like a pile of scribbles is actually a megalodon eating everything in the world and then drinking all the sea and then eating its own bones. And you didn't know this when you looked at the scribble, but that is what's going on. And it's a beautiful introduction to the book, because I think everybody can draw. Everybody begins drawing, and if we can write, if we can form letters, I think we can draw, but we stop drawing, and we're told that that we should be focusing on other things, as he says in the beginning.
Well, it's interesting too, because we stop drawing because we're told it doesn't represent reality accurately, right? That there is this kind of calibration to subjugation of fantasy to reality that's quite punitive of the imagination. And yet in grown-up life, we spend our days trying to discern where reality ends and unreality begins in a way in order to live our lives. We have to always be testing what is real. So I wonder how to preserve that fantastical imagination in drawing while adapting to the real world, which demands a reverence of reality in a way. Like, who are the kids who become artists, basically, who say, I'm going to create wonder and fantasy even though I live in the real world? And that's also reality.
Yeah, and who have the confidence and who have people around them saying, just keep doing that thing. That's great. That's kind of all we want and need, isn't it? A little bit of encouragement.
What kept you drawing?
Oh, do we get to this slide, or oh, well,
What are you looking for?
Well, Piglet, but we're not ready at Piglet
Okay,
yet.
we'll get to Piglet.
Okay.
We'll get to Piglet. Well, this is actually interesting. Okay, so this question of fantasy and reality. I was thinking a lot about Wonderland. I mean, Wonderland is a world that is the ultimate unreality. The Red Queen is the ultimate monarch of alternative facts, and anyone who disagrees with her version, off with their head, you know. And I was thinking about the relationship between the fertile illusion of fantasy and the destructive delusion of fundamentalism share the same psychological structure. They are both, they both enlist the imagination in mystifying. Fantasy mystifies in order to reveal some deeper truth, and fundamentalism mystifies in order to conceal. And anyway, I was just thinking about that as Wonderland is this thought experiment of what kind of society is it when someone is telling you what is real, even when you can see with your own eyes that it's not, and the kind of moral courage, which is a courage of the imagination, to be Alice and to really kind of say, no, this is what I see as real is reality.
I just reread Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which I had not read in, I think, since I read it to my kids, who are here somewhere. Some of them are. I have so many. And it was, I mean, I think as a parent, one of the great joys is rereading books that you loved as a child to your children. You don't have to be a parent to do that, of course. Sharing books that were formative to you, that you know, are deeply embedded in your psyche, and then sharing those and forcing the people you love to respond to them, and then sometimes the people you love say, actually, I don't know if I like that book. Sorry, Maria. But rereading Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, I just fell down that rabbit hole and thought, this is so good. I love this book so much. And I also thought how brave Alice was, which didn't especially occur to me as a child, but she just says yes at every turn. She says, yes, I'll try that liquid in that bottle. Yes, I'll have a little bit more. Yes, I will eat this cake.
But she's also the ultimate empiricist, because she says, yes, I'll do the experiment, but then I'll discern what is, because the reason it's such a wonderful and persuasive world is that despite the unreality, it's extremely logically coherent, actually. I mean, Lewis Carroll was a mathematician and a logician, Charles Dodgson, so he created a world that was self-consistent. And this is one of the most sort of comforting thing in anything. You know, incoherence is the most discomposing and disorienting thing in another person, in a society, and a universe, you know, and he created this very coherent world where even the unreal things were internally consistent, and there's Alice going in with a kind of empirical, yes, I'll try it, and I'll draw my conclusion kind of mindset.
Yes, and then there is that delightful, subversive, like with the Duchess and her morals and the way she is moralizing, and her morals are all topsy-turvy and all over the place. And she says things to Alice like, be as you would seem to be, and then says, or let me put it more simply, do not imagine that you are otherwise than what it might appear to others that you are or might have been, and just goes on and on and on. And Alice says, if I could see it written down, that might help. And she says, let me explain it to you in another way. And Alice says, please don't. And I just loved it so much.
Well, you know those yogi tea bag fortunes? Do you guys know on the tea bags, there's these like totally trite sayings that are a little bit like that?
What does that mean?
This living example of how you can use words to conceal truth, or just sort of like, you know.
And don't you think we do that to children all the time?
Yeah.
And that some of the books that we force upon them, I mean, I completely agree with you, the things that you said in the beginning of this conversation about how we can hope that good books for children will guide them in a way to be more empathetic and kind people, and that is the great hope. But I think so many of the books that we are making for them are didactic and moralizing and
Today, yes.
yes,
Very,
and don't, the thing that, and this is my soapbox, which I was not intending to get on just yet, I was going to get on much later, is that they sometimes don't have a story. And while these books can be wonderful and there can be a, absolute reason why we should have all of these books, I'm a big believer in all the books, and let kids choose which books they want to read. But I do think that children deserve a story. And I think a story is the thing that feeds their curiosity, that makes them want to turn the page, that makes them read more and become more empathetic and have the imaginative life that enables them to see and feel what somebody else might see and feel, which is the clearest way to maybe learn to love somebody else.
And also it shows them that stories are what make worlds. And in the world we live in, it is so because of stories we've been told about it, which we can question. I started today Ta-Nehisi Coates' new book, The Message. Is so wonderful. And he talks about this kind of storytelling mind that it enables us then to question the stories we have been sold as a set version of the world. But I agree, I don't think that's done by moralizing and polemics. It's done by feeding the imagination so it discovers its own ability to make and break stories.
Right, and to give children a sense of agency in those stories. Because obviously, one of the things that distinguishes children's books is they are written for a swath of the population who has no power, basically. And one of the things that I think about when I'm making books is to try and make a book that a child will want to read again and again and again, because that's one of the things that I've learned, that children will want to return to that book because they know how it ends, and very little in their lives is familiar in that way. It's a great unknown. They don't know where they're going to go, what's going to happen, how they're going to get there. All of these decisions are made for them, but when they reread a book, they know how it ends, and they can enjoy that journey to get there with the security of a familiar, safe place to end, which is, I think, why we return to books.
Well, it's just making me realize why I have such a compulsion to listen to songs on a loop for 3 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
It is very soothing to have this. I was reading this week, so Doris Lessing, months after I was born, delivered the Massey Lectures in Canada under the very haunting title, Prisons We Choose to Live Inside. And she talks about certain things from history that have been examples of sort of groupthink and unreality that's sold to masses of people. And then she says something that to me is essentially about Wonderland and Alice. She says, nearly everyone in such situations behaves automatically. So all the subjects of the Queen who don't question. But there is always the minority who do not. And it seems to me that our future, the future of everybody, depends on this minority. And that we should be thinking of ways to educate our children to strengthen this minority and not, as we mostly do now, to revere the pack.
Right.
And that's what story gives children, the agency to imagine themselves as characters in a different story and telling different stories, unbelieving the main story, the mainstream story.
Right. And it's why fairy tales are so perennially popular, seems like the wrong word, but why we read them over and over and over again is because a child can feel that sense of outrage and injustice, and then they can feel brave and they can see that things are going to be tied up at the end, but along the way it's so much fun, and hopefully someone's head will get chopped off. I was reading about earlier versions of Cinderella. So, we're familiar with the Brothers Grimm versions, and then, of course, it's all been Disneyfied. But I want to say it was maybe Norway or some other country that has great stretches of time with little sun, where the version was so fantastically dark that you might know this, but when Cinderella has married the prince and is, happy and rich and has her own slipper back on her foot, she goes back to her house and her wicked stepmother is there, and she brings her a trunk full of treasures to make peace and says, "Here you are." And the stepmother leans over to look at the riches in the trunk, and she slams the top and chops off her head. And, and I've not met a child who does not love that ending. And Alice is full of, that line where there's the whole argument about the Cheshire Cat, which is only a head, right? And can you chop off a disembodied head? And who is it who says, well, if it's a head, it can be chopped off?
I used to have this recurring dream when I was a child of the Cheshire Cat sleeping on my chest, and I would wake up but in the dream and its head would be right here. But wait, the Cinderella thing is making me think of Rebecca Solnit's rewriting of Cinderella. Has anybody read that? She wrote it for her niece, whose name is Ella, and it's incredible because it gives agency to all the creatures. So the mice get the choice to remain mice and not to, one of them chooses to remain a mouse and not be turned into the horseman or whatever. And it's a very interesting thought experiment in a very Rebecca Solnit way, but it's kind of the opposite of that. It's this ultimate life-enforcing thing to every creature in the story. Speaking of which, Piglet. Oh, wait, we'll come back to Beatrix Potter.
Oh, Piglet.
Piglet.
So you asked how I began drawing and why I kept drawing. This is the drawing that made me want to illustrate children's books. And I was 7 years old, up a tree, and reading and rereading Winnie the Pooh. And I would trace Shepard's drawings because I couldn't figure out how he built them. I couldn't figure out how, with so few lines, he could create these characters that felt like my friends. That it was the first book that, to me, did not condescend to me as a child. A.M. wrote, to me as though he was writing just to me, and I traced and retraced Piglet, especially his ears. I would narrow it down to say that it was Piglet's ears that made me want to be an illustrator. He is described as the pig with excited ears. That was on my list.
Hence
Ears, comma, excited.
Excited.
Yeah. Do we have, and then the full circle is the next slide, I think. Oh no, maybe it was after this one. We didn't plan this. This was from Finding Winnie, which is a book about the real story of the bear that inspired Winnie the Pooh, and that when I got to do that book felt like this great full circle.
That book made me cry so much. I love that book so much. But wait, back to the ears, because they have a shape that is a little familiar.
Yes.
Back to the Little Prince. So the
So we're doing this. It was seamless, wasn't it? One of my favorite things about The Little Prince, and I do have things that I love about The Little Prince. I'm not just saying that.
There is no wasted experience in life, even a book.
The best thing about the book really is his scarf, I think. But it is that thing of the ears, of how to convey emotion with a couple of lines. And I realized when I was thinking about us talking about The Little Prince, how I have completely stolen the scarf and used it in so many different ways, including my pandemic project, which was Philip the Sweet Potato.
That's a... You have to see this. It's a little film. So Sophie, besides being an incredible artist, I think is like a Virginia Woolf level writer.
Oh,
So she
please.
wrote this, it's Philip the non-binary potato, and inspired by
My
one of her
child.
children, Olive. And it's this like incredible, I mean, Orlando-esque narrative of this potato, which was a real potato in Sophie's life.
It was the last sweet potato in the store in 2020 when we would go individually to the supermarket, and it came home and we couldn't eat it, obviously. So I made it a scarf, and then many adventures. It was it was feeling all of our feels. Philip, they were, yeah. In the end, I was doing it on a kind of daily basis. I would set the timer and spend an hour on Philip and make little sets. It was a little ridiculous.
Bless artists, what would the world be without the people making art out of the last potato in the store?
But I had to end it in the end because people from around the world were sending, somebody wanted to knit Philip a sweater. And I was like, do you realize this is a yam we're talking about? But anyway, yes, there was a wedding, it was a whole thing.
And then these guys.
Just
More scarves.
Yeah, more scarves. They do crop up a lot. Yeah, This was to make it seem like it wasn't just one idea. I was backing it up with a second example.
Isn't it amazing how influences and ideas permeate the psyche, often without our awareness, and kind of lodge themselves in there and become these quiet building blocks of what we create, often without us knowing that we're creating out of these borrowed pieces. Yeah.
Did we want to go back to...
Potter? Let's do some Potter.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, I had to twist Maria's arm to include Beatrix Potter. So, wait, tell me, when I said, well, can we talk about Beatrix Potter, you said...
I'm just not familiar. She never made it to Bulgaria. Beatrix Potter, not big in Bulgaria. Peter Rabbit, not big in Bulgaria. I, as an adult, did not... I fell in love with her scientific drawings and her studies of mushrooms and the whole story of her. I don't know if you guys know about this. She, first of all, started drawing mushroom species that to this day mycologists use to identify species. And then she became really fascinated by lichens, because at the time it was unclear how lichens reproduce. So she started conducting these experiments and essentially discovered the mechanism by which they produce, which is a kind of hybrid between an algae and a land plant. And then she wanted to present her research at Kew Gardens, and they were like, no, women can't present in the all-male meetings. So she got her uncle, who was some kind of physician, to present her research. And then at the end, he like revealed it was by his niece, and everybody was like, you know. But anyway, it's interesting to me. I love people who refuse to reduce their gift to one category. And here was someone very much interested in science who was also an incredible artist and writer. I just don't know enough about that side of her life to contribute usefully. But you do.
Well, I love all of that about her too, but I do love her children's books, which I think you said you thought might be too sweet for your
They're too
taste.
sweet for me. I'm from Eastern Europe. We like
But
burn
they're
people.
not. See, this is what I love about them. I think one of my favorite things is that underlying darkness in something that seems sweet on the surface. And Beatrix Potter's stories they're so beautiful. But like Miss Tiggywinkle, who is a hedgehog in a darling little bonnet, has her quills sticking through the bonnet. And the Jemima Puddle Duck, who is making a nest to lay her eggs, is guided by the foxy gentleman to lay her eggs in his shed, where he's made a lovely bed for her made of feathers. And then she goes along with it because she's not very smart. And at the end, she has her eggs and they hatch into ducklings, but she loses most of them because she was just, inattentive, poor thing. Yeah, maybe they're not for you.
You love it just because of your love of ducks, is that what it is?
Well, there is that. But no, they're all basically just trying not to eat each other. They're all about that.
That's the blurb on the next collection of Peter Rabbit. Just trying not to eat each other.
But so, can we take these off now? I'm going
Yes.
to take these off.
Well, I'm cold, so I'm going to get right on.
So, I think there's a distinction between writers of books for children and illustrators, makers of books for children, who make books with child readers in mind, who talk to children, who involve them perhaps in the process of making the book. And Lewis Carroll did that, right? He came up with the story
For Alice Liddell
for
and her
Alice
sisters.
and her sisters in the boat. And then while he was working on it, he read it to like a whole bunch of other children as well. There were many children, and he was very invested in how they responded to the story, and I think he shaped it based on the bits that they liked and didn't like. And Beatrix Potter similarly began these stories as these illustrated letters to the children of her governess, who was only 3 years older than her, and then had these children. And these stories, she was always thinking about the child reader. When they were published, she made them very small so that they would fit into a child's hand. She wanted them originally to be just black and white line drawings because she wanted them to be kept inexpensive, the printing, but they insisted on color. And the drawing of Peter Rabbit on the cover, she called that idiotic prancing rabbit, because she was always about the anatomy of animals and how they are true to their animal selves, and that she felt was more what you're talking about, like this kind of sweet little bunny in an outfit going to have tea, and it's not eating each other. That's really what it's about.
Well, maybe that's the science part of her. She's like, I'm going
Yes.
to make something sweet and beautiful, but it's going to have fidelity to the actual realities of nature.
Did anybody see the amazing exhibition here at the Morgan with the... Yes, and there was Benjamin Bunny's pelt, right?
I grew up with animal pelts, so...
Yeah, there's nothing squeamish about her. And you would love, her diary, right, that was coded, that would be, you like science. That's science.
Code crack that. Okay, I need to re-immerse
Yes.
myself in Beatrix
Yeah.
Potter's world.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone's coming back to Earth right now. Hold on.
And just the reinventing herself, and as a story, quite apart from the books, just as you said, someone who did so many different things and became a farmer and saved
and was one of the early conservation.
yes.
She really kind of applied so many
basically
farming techniques that were so ahead of their time, and
Yeah.
through the war, she tended to that land. I don't know what I pressed, but I pressed something. Okay. Well, just some pretty pictures.
Yeah. Okay, so
Wait,
on
can
my
we
list.
talk about
Yes.
the Lewis Carroll drawing and not drawing and
I think
history of Alice?
I had bad drawing on my
There
list.
it is.
Shortly before heads chopped off.
Okay, we covered truth, hope,
Oh, we're down to
curiosity,
that stuff.
check, check.
That's what we do at the end to make everyone feel like they
Scars,
got their
done.
money's worth.
Fairy tales,
Done.
Ears excited.
We did
done.
Ears Excited. Oh, Ear Carroll and Centennial. Did you?
Elaborate.
Oh, so Carroll was deaf in one ear. Did you know that?
I did not.
Lewis Carroll, he lost his hearing in one ear. And John Tenniel, who we think of most commonly as the illustrator of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Right, I mean, it's been illustrated thousands of times probably, but I think when we think of the iconic Alice and Mad Hatter and Duchess and Queen, we think of the Centennial drawings and the Cheshire Cat. He was blind in one eye, and he lost his eyesight in a fencing accident when he was 20 with his father, who basically stabbed him in the eye. But the detail that is incredibly sweet is he never wanted his father to know the extent of the damage, so he just sort of pretended he was fine for the rest of his life. But isn't that nice? But I just thought that was interesting.
Remember life before the invention of therapy?
Okay. So Lewis Carroll, you probably all know this, because I always assume that everybody knows a lot more than I do, and I'm usually right. But Lewis Carroll started out illustrating Alice himself. And that was the first version that he gave to Alice Little. He had his own drawings. And they're kind of sweet. They're not bad. They're kind of probably better than I would do with that pen and ink. But they're funny. And the Centennial drawings are way better. But there is something very dear about the Lewis Carroll drawings. And I say that only as just to kind of make peace with the Saint Exupéry drawings, which I think are quite bad, actually. But has the scarf, which has been so deeply, influential in my own life.
But what I said to you initially about the drawings, the thing to me is that Exupéry is a storyteller, so the drawings are an afterthought.
Yeah.
You're an artist, and your art carries the story. He never even tried to carry the story with the drawings. He was just like decorating the story just to have some visuals. So I think these are different modes of...
Yeah, and I mean, I think he drew, from what I've read, he drew the Little Prince over and over and over again. So I think he was deeply connected to those drawings.
So a lot of the drawings here in the collection, you can see him working out, testing out a lot of the drawings did not end up in the final book. So this one here on the left is a draft of something that became something else.
Yeah.
And you can see the line, the pencil, like he was trying to kind of get the idea visually, and I don't know how he felt about whether or not he succeeded.
Yeah, and when I use the word bad drawing, I mean, I'm also going to argue that there's no such thing, and I love bad drawing, and I'm often a very bad drawer, and there are some people who have this facility for drawing, and there are several people in this audience, I'm pointing at you, who can just draw the thing that they see in their heads, and it comes out an extension through their arm and hand and drawing utensil, and it looks the way they intend it to look. And then there are the rest of us, like, me and Saint Exupéry, who are like, this is so hard. This is so hard. And I love talking to kids about that, because you see this picture in your head, and then you try and put it in the page. On the page, it looks nothing like the thing that you intended. And then you either sort of have to learn to live with this blobby sort of
See, this
thing.
is interesting, because that strikes me now as maybe a difference between art and writing. Because for writers, for me, and we had an event last week for Oliver Sacks's letters, and there's a bunch of us writers reading his letters about writing, and about sort of how, as a writer, you work yourself out in your writing. So in the act of writing, you are thinking through things. I don't have the mental image of what I'm going to write as I'm writing it. I might have some ideas, but often I learn so much about it in the act. But you're portraying this as like a conveying, like a Xeroxing of a consciousness onto a piece of art.
That's why it's so hard. I know. And I think of that too with writing, that sometimes it's like, well, you've already got this lump of clay and you're shaping it. Or sometimes I think of it as mending. When I'm writing, I've written this great torrent of, bad sentences, and then it's about mending them and, trying to kind of stitch them back into something that is cloth. But drawing is, you've just got to get it out of there and onto there. And sometimes you only have one shot at that. Or, as my studio mate Robert Watkins said recently, the thing that you're making becomes taxidermied, which we all thought, oh, that's good, we're going to steal that. The thing that was, that was once alive, by the time you've drawn it and drawn it and drawn it again, has become this other.
Do you ever surprise yourself when you draw?
Well, that's why I included that blobby drawing, because I'm not sure if my beloved editor is in the audience, but my beloved editor
Which
saw
one is the
that
blobby?
the blobby drawing with the scarf that was with the those guys. My beloved editor Anne Schwartz saw this blobby drawing and said, if you ever want to make a book like that, which is not how I usually draw at all, let's do that book. And then I couldn't actually make that book. We made another book, but they didn't stay like that because I could only do that when I wasn't thinking
What
about
about
it.
your hands project? I wish I'd brought one of the. Did you want to say something about it? I wonder if that was. You've made so many of them. I would imagine maybe some of them surprised you. Did they?
Maybe, but yeah, that was sort of more like a, how can I push this one idea and just see what else I can do with this. I did a hand every day for, I don't know, 50 days. No, I think it was 50. Yeah, different kinds of hands.
In each hand, there was a miniature world or idea in them, and they were so different. Yeah.
I've got 50 ideas in me. No more, just 50.
Let's see if the time has come to open up for. Yes, so we're going to take just a few questions. Please make them questions. Keep them short and pertinent. And we have one rule, which is you may not ask us about our favorite children's books, because we're going to be here all night. And I have a ferry to catch. Okay, here we go. Mics are floating. Raise your hand, and a mic will appear in it. Well, there is an earlier ferry. Back there, there's at the very top. Can we get the house lights down a little, please, Carl?
Oh.
Well, we heard all of it, so go on. Question mark? How can we make it easier for children to have self-permission to express different realities? Okay.
Hi, Kate. I think the teachers that I have seen in school visits and the art teachers and the librarians are so much more aware of that now than they were when I was a kid. I mean, I remember that we were all told to draw the same thing, and then it would be up on the wall, and there would be little room for that kind of variation and individual, that let alone being subversive or finding another way around. So that's my optimistic idea, that I think things are a lot better. Visiting schools and seeing amazing artwork.
I have a very small scale and a very big picture thought. The small scale is I heard somebody recently who's both a parent and an artist tell me that when their child shows them a drawing, they've learned not to say, "What is this?" but to say, "Tell me about this." And then you get a whole story and the whole world of imagination and not a, My personal take is that I think it is very important to create a paradigm in which reality is not just representation, but reality is also imagination. So inviting that in any way we can, where it's not equated with just the representational, but also the imaginal, ever which way, and yeah.
Hi. First of all, thank you both. Piglet was also my favorite. My question was sort of around process. You were talking a little bit about Lewis Carroll, like workshopping almost with kids, and then you were chatting about how you start sometimes like with illustration more than with maybe the written story. How are you storytelling differently than maybe you did when you started out illustrating and writing? And I'm curious how that's been shaped, whether it's like by raising children or just by writing your 25th book or whatever it is, what you feel the differences are between now and at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I think thank you. It is so interesting looking at the books that we love, and I'm curious about that distinction between someone like Maurice Sendak, who famously said, I make books and then other people tell me they're for children. And I'm not sure I entirely believe him about that, or rather that he's making the book for the child that he was. And I think
I would agree with that, because those of us who write children's books who don't have children only have that reference point in a way,
Right, exactly. I don't know if any of you have seen the documentary about the making of Sesame Street. It's called Street Gang. It's fantastic. But it was fascinating to me that they ran that past kids. They had so many test groups of audiences of kids, of the things that they responded to. And we don't do that as a rule with books. We make books and then we put them out there and then we hope that kids like them, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And I'm not necessarily advocating for, focus groups, control groups with kids, but I know that when I'm on the road, I love showing kids something in progress, because I love seeing the bits that make sense to them, the bits that make them laugh, because I think I'm one of the people who does make books with the child reader in mind, but some people don't. And again, I think both can exist, and I'm all for more books, more reading, more... Oh, on that, we didn't get to there. Could I just quickly say, thank you. You're so going to regret this, aren't you?
She came with a list.
So this is what I believe. If I could get to say one thing, and I said it really well to Ed in the kitchen, and now it's not going to come out as articulately. Just imagine that this is said really, articulately and succinctly. What I believe is that I want to foster a curiosity in children so that they will feel confident that they can read any book that they might want to pick up, that book is accessible to them, that they don't have to finish it if they don't like it, but they can read any book, and that through reading those books and the books that you find in a little free library or in our laundry on the shelves, I saw Mary Poppins, L. Ron Hubbard, and Frederick Douglass. Now, those three together on the shelf you would not expect. No gatekeeper is putting those three books together, but there's bound to be something interesting in all of them. And so if a child is encouraged to be curious, I believe that they will continue to read and they will become a more empathetic human being, and I think we need that more than ever. Okay.
And isn't that the gist of our theme? Children's books as a philosophy for living. There is no greater philosophy for living than curiosity, because that is the antipode of contempt. That is the only remedy for contempt. replacing contempt with curiosity. My friend Marie Howe, who's a poet, we had the first event in the series with her. She teaches eco-poetry at Sarah Lawrence, and she gives her students this assignment where she asks, what is an animal you loathe? Like loathe. And people would say, oh, wasp or rat or jellyfish or whatever. And she says, go and find out everything you can about that animal and write a poem. And by the end of the semester, those are love poems, because you cannot but fall in love with something you actually understand and are interested in.
Yes, and that is Beatrix Potter too, who said whenever she was overcome with bad feelings, she would draw. It was the only thing that she could do, and it was a way of focusing your attention on something, because if you're drawing the way Beatrix Potter would and not some blobby thing out of your head, you are actually looking intently at that thing, which is the same thing. And she talks about being in a terrible depression and found herself drawing the swill bucket, and then which made her laugh, and then she felt eminently better.
And then up here in the front, because you've been persistent, we'll get to you.
Hello. I'm Melanie. Thank you both so much. I love that you brought up Beatrix Potter. This exhibit was fabulous. Thank you, Morgan Library. And there's a wonderful biography by Linda Lear, who also did Rachel Carson's
Yes, she's an amazing biographer.
and it's
Lear.
a 500-word. I just finished it last month. It's fabulous. So Beatrix Potter is one of these like twinkle in her eye, kind of imagine the world, see the world differently, just like Byrd Baylor, Tove Jansson. I think there's this like feminine children's book author that like sees the world differently, and I'm curious what other like, I don't know, feminist queering of the world, like authors that really spark the imagination, that really inspire you, specifically women, because I think they're trying to create new worlds and have an empathy for the child's experience more than perhaps a man of that age would.
I don't necessarily agree with the kind of philosophical conclusion that that's something women do, but I will speak to some women authors. My heart is with Margaret Wise Brown. She imagined things that were so courageous and single of mind, but also broad and deep and quirky and subversive. And I will say, as a kind of umbrella over a lot of the women of that era, Ruth Krauss and all that, we owe so much of that to Ursula Nordstrom, the great children's book editor who discovered many of these young writers, including Maurice Sendak and A.B. White and Shel Silverstein. And I think it's so important to have actually editors and publishers who give space to voices that are off mainstream. Yeah. But yeah, Margaret Wise Brown for me is she's my number one.
And there are so many fantastic contemporary books being made by all kinds of makers, and we've got to make sure that they are accessible to kids and not being banned, which is a whole other conversation that we don't have time to get into. We'd be here all night. But one of my favorite books of all time is The Country Bunny and the Little Gold Shoes, which is from 1939. I think it's one of the first feminist picture books, and written by Du Bois Hayward and illustrated by Marjorie Flack. And it is fantastic. If you haven't read it, it holds up extremely well, and it's beautiful.
Do you have the mic?
I should never have said that, should I, about that?
I mean, I think writing has multiple levels that it's assessed on, and one of it is the aesthetic beauty of the prose, which you can say Gertrude Stein, for example, you wouldn't say is like beautiful writing, but it's absolutely extraordinary and enchanting and all that stuff. And then there's the level of meaning, and then there's the level of concept. So there are many more layers, and I think they have to cohere in order for it to be good, meaning satisfying, let's put it that way. Because to me, I mean, of course I'm biased because I'm a writer, I'm not an artist, but I think there are ways in which drawing can delight even when it's technically imperfect, but there are ways in which writing fails to satisfy unless it has that coherence. And I don't know if there's an equivalent in drawing, because drawing can be very incoherent and still be somehow like delightful.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, and then there can be sort of like digital clip art kind of drawing, which no one really wants to look at. I'm just looking at you. I'm just digging a hole. I had a really good thought back then. Oh, it's gone. See, this is why I have a list.
I was going to say.
It'll come back to me, or it won't. I'm a middle-aged woman. What can I say? Yeah, quick.
Okay, we'll come back to you.
Okay.
Your brain will come back to you.
Oh, I know what it
None of our brains
was.
are at capacity this week. Let's just acknowledge there's a diminished cognitive capacity happening.
I remember what it was. I saw my beloved son in the audience, and I was thinking about a time when he was leaving to go to school, and he was probably about 7 or 8 years old, and it was winter, and I was bundling him up and putting his hat on and putting chapstick on him, and I felt like I was just like, oh, one more thing, here's your lunch, here's your... And my cousin who was staying with us said, it's like you are trying to protect him for everything that may befall him in the great world of, when he leaves the house, which is exactly what we do every morning when we, wave our beloveds of any kind, off. And it reminded me of something Catherine Rundle wrote about. Do you all know Catherine Rundle? She wrote an amazing, it's an essay, it's a small book called Why You Should Read Children's Books Even Though You Are So Old and Wise, and I highly recommend it. She's very smart, and she said that she believes people who are making books for children just want to put every single thing they can into those books to prepare kids to go out into the world, this world that is changing by the day, this world that we can't seem to predict at all, and we cannot count on basic civility and kindness and empathy. We cannot. So we are trying to give children, we're trying to arm them with everything that we know to be true. And that is what we are trying to put into the books that we give to children.
It reminded me of something I was reading today, a poem that Louise Erdrich wrote called Advice to Myself #2, Resistance. And there's this one, it's like resist this, resist that, and there's one line that says, resist cleaning up your children's messes. You're saving them from small despairs they can fix.
Oh, I like that.
And that is all the time we have tonight, lovely people. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Oh. And hello to all of the lovely people who were streaming from home. I meant to say that before. Even from Australia, all the way.
Oh, and also outside there are copies of Sophie's wonderful book, Things to Look Forward to, which saved me during the pandemic and all of a sudden is very relevant and comforting right now. So I recommend
Maria's
it. They're
Figuring
signed.
and Universe in Verse.